Hello and welcome to the World Hearts Business for Good podcast. My guest today is Janette Evans-Turner, the UK Head of Sourcing and Procurement at Zurich Insurance. Janette is also responsible for leading Zurich's global social procurement initiative and driving the Buy Social campaign. It was actually through this campaign that you and I met at the House of Parliament a few years ago now, Janette. Do you remember then?
I do, and it's hard to think back. Zurich now we were one of the founding members, so we've been involved with the Buy Corporate Challenge now. We're in our fifth year, and you just think, blimey, where's that time gone?
It's amazing how much it's grown though from the original signatories. I think there's over 33 companies now signed up, but we're going to get into that. Before we talk about all the great stuff you've been doing in social procurement, tell us a bit about yourself. What path did you take to get where you are today? And don't cut any of the juicy bits out, Janette.
Okay, I'll try not to. So, as you said, I'm Janette Evans-Turner. So, a bit about me. I've got two lovely children, a boy and a girl, and we live on the south coast in a place called Bedhampton. So, we're near the countryside, but also right by the sea as well, which is fantastic. So, we spend a lot of time there at weekends with our dog Coco. So, my path and a bit about me. So, following university, where I did a HND actually in business marketing, because like many people, you leave college kind of struggling to still see where I wanted my career, and marketing really interested me at the time. So I took a HND in business marketing at Southampton Business School, well, Solent University at the time. And after that course, again, I was still really struggling to see where my career was going. I took a job actually initially in recruitment. So I was headhunting solicitors, lawyers at the time, which I did that role for about 6 months and realized pretty quickly that I was not a salesperson. And, it really didn't fit me or what I wanted to do, long term in my career. So I was thinking about either traveling or going back to university to finish and extend my HND to a degree. And whilst I was looking to save money for either traveling or going back to university, I took a full-time role as a contractor actually in an organization called Zyratex. It was just as an admin assistant at the time working in procurement. So it was a manufacturing procurement. So I was working for the chief procurement officer. I was probably in that role a couple of months when an assistant buyer role became available. And I started to really show an interest, and, it excited me. I liked the work that they were doing. And I said at the time it was manufacturing. So it was really quite fast paced. So, yeah, I kind of jumped at the chance. He came to me and said, look, why don't you apply for this? And I suppose really the rest is history from there. I stayed with Zyratex for a couple of years and progressed from assistant buyer to buyer. They also sponsored me at the time to go to college part time to do my SIPs, to do my MSIPs qualification. So very fortunate at the time that they sponsored and would give me the leave 1 day a week and supported me through that course at quite a young age actually. So again, really fortunate. So I was with Zyratex a couple of years actually when there was a management buyout, and I moved across to a company called Teleplan and moved from manufacturing, so direct procurement, into indirect, and became responsible for CRE and FM at the time. So again, excellent opportunity, really gave me the breadth of the procurement function and the role. I mean, I look back now and how much the profession has evolved, how the systems evolved over time, etc. I still remember having, the forms where we would have to write your business requirements on a form, get them signed by a stakeholder, and just chase paper through the organization, basically. Zyratex and Teleplan gave me a really, really good start in my career. I stayed there for, as I said, probably about 3 years, 2 to 3 years. And then an opportunity came available for me to move on to IBM. So I went over to IBM and again stayed within facilities management. I was running a big contract then at the time. That also gave me excellent kind of start to my career. Move into an organization like IBM, a big corporate. And I think that's when I first really started to get an insight as well into corporate responsibility.
When was that?
So that would have been early 2000s.
That's quite ahead of the game, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's going back, and IBM, were a fantastic organisation, and again gave me a lot of opportunity to get involved with some big initiatives at the time. But again, I probably only stayed there a couple of years because early in my career, I was just, I remember actually just sitting there, and a lot of people in IBM have been in the organization, 30, 35 years. I remember thinking, I just don't want to stay in one organization for that long. I
Hmm.
want to get exposure and to, get experience in different companies. And at the time, I was commuting quite a bit to London, to South Bank, and working on a project there. And I saw an advert come up for Zurich and applied. And again, the rest is history. And so I've been at Zurich for 17 years now. I started in claims procurement as a procurement consultant. In those early days, I was very much involved in the sourcing of our legal panels and our loss adjuster panels, and predominantly then worked my way up within claims vendor management and started to lead the property vendor management team. So again, was responsible for your building repair, your mitigation services, your contents, a real breadth of category. So yeah, that's where I started my career in Zurich, and again have been there 17 years, moved around, moved through claims vendor management, then worked on a couple of projects, and then moved into group and started working in heading up sourcing and procurement. And that's where we first met as part of the corporate challenge 5 years ago.
You make it sound as if you just, oh, then I moved here and then I moved there. Were you ambitious? Did you ever see yourself being the head of procurement for such a major company?
No, would be the truth. Not back then. I always say to my children, actually, when you talk about your career and the steps that you've taken, sometimes I think I was in the right place at the right time.
Hmm.
I absolutely wanted to progress as well, but I think, I enjoy what I do and I like to grow within my roles as well. And I think you get to a certain point, don't you, within your career where you think, actually, it's the next step, it's the next thing I want to do. And also, I've had some really fantastic managers and sponsors and mentors along the journey who've really coached and supported me through my career.
Hmm. Which is so important, isn't it? Being in the right
So
culture.
important,
Yeah.
so important. I really do owe some of those great people who've mentored me and coached me and supported me, a great deal, because I think having that sponsorship in an organization who just that create that network to then be able to see when the opportunities become available
Hmm.
and to push you to go for those opportunities as well, to make you feel that you can progress.
It's amazing how sometimes you don't see it in yourself, but somebody else does, and they push you forward. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And what about your upbringing? In what way has your upbringing, your personal values, influenced how you approach your role? I mean, you must have been given each role your best efforts because that's how you got to go on to the next step. And is that something to do with your upbringing or your values and where you were brought up, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So I lived in St Helens where all my family were based till I was about 7. My parents both worked for Pilkinson's Glass, who were a huge employer in the town and back then. But again, it was a time of the early 80s when there was lots of redundancies.
Mm.
And actually, my parents just kind of looked and thought, we just need to have more stability and more opportunity, certainly for I have an older brother as well who's 4 years older than me. So they were also looking at the time and our education and when would be the best time to move. So actually they trained, they took a job with Whitbreads at the time, and they came down south and trained to be pub landlords. And I remember at the time they left me and my brother actually for a couple of months to live with my grandparents while they were training and moving around. So, it wouldn't have been the environment to bring two young children to, whilst they were setting up a new life in the south. So we spent some time at my grandparents' house, and who we were always very close to because my parents both worked, as I said, when I was growing up. So that's all I've ever known. My grandparents, actually, my grandfather at the time, retired to look after my brother and I, and I've got excellent, fond memories of the time spent with my nan and granddad. When you look back on those people who've really influenced you, they absolutely, undoubtedly, are two huge characters in my life who I still think back to, the advice they've given me all those years ago. We moved down south, as I said, as when I was 7. And as pub landlords, as you can imagine, we moved around quite a bit. I went to numerous schools up until I went to senior school, moved to lots of different places. And I think that gives you, a resilience because probably every 2 years I was moving to different schools.
Mm.
So, having to go in create new friendship groups, but also just living in that kind of pub environment as well really exposes you early on to lots of walks of life, lots of different types of people. And my parents really, really instilled in my brother and I a sense of empathy. I mean, I think you're only ever a step away, aren't you, from a life crisis?
Mm-hmm.
And we certainly had them as a family. In the early 90s, they bought their own pub at the time, and probably just at the wrong time, just before, the recession. So they had that pub for 4 or 5 years, but actually, unfortunately, due to the recession, they were made bankrupt. I kind of watched them have to start again. They were probably my age now when they had to, in their early 40s, when, they really had to start and build everything again. And I just look back now and have, such pride in how they did that
Mm-hmm.
and how they kind of demonstrated to my brother and I, there's always tomorrow and you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. They just looked at the positive. They were so resilient when I look back now, because there must have been many tears, but I never witnessed those. All I did see was their ability to pick themselves up and start again.
There's so many lessons as you're just talking about your family upbringing. There's all the, strength of character, unbelievable work ethic, ambition, to move from up north in England down to the south, and all those, emotional traits that you were just brought up with that maybe you thought was normal, but they're pretty impressive. And they sound like pretty tough people, actually.
Yeah, yeah, they are. They are very funny people as well. Great sense of humor, and I think that's a real characteristic, which I think is really a great foundation.
You tell me about it. Yeah.
You have to have a sense of humor in life, because you're really going to need it along the way.
So you've already touched on that, Jen, in terms of how significant setbacks. Is there any career experiences at the time felt like real failures, and yet they set you up for later success?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was a fate, but I remember one huge mistake early in my career when I worked for IBM. And actually, just reflecting on this the last week or so, it's one of those that I'll never forget. But I remember how my manager handled it at the time. And that was the biggest learning for me. So, very early on in my career, I was doing an energy tender. And I was pulling together the requirements and the commercials and distributing that, circulating it to the market. And actually, what I had done is left the commercials on there from the previous year.
Mm.
So all the pricing, which is a huge no-no, as we know from a confidentiality, but it's just a huge no-no. And as I said, it was very early on in my career, and I remember sitting there thinking, well, I should just pack up my desk and look to go home. So I knocked on my manager's door, and I was white as a ghost kind of thing. And he said, "Come in. What's wrong?" And I told him, and to this day, I just remember the way he said to me, "Look, we all make mistakes, and you will never ever make that same one again. That's the biggest learning. You've got to make mistakes to learn from them." But as I said, the biggest takeaway from me was he never made me feel, he made me just realize that everybody makes mistakes.
Mm.
It's not unsurmountable. Yes, it wasn't ideal, but it wasn't the end of the world.
And you're still talking about it now?
And I still, and it's often what I say to people who work for me now. Look, everybody makes mistakes. We're only human. We're bound to make mistakes.
Mm.
I think it's how you react to those mistakes and how you learn from those mistakes. And he was right. I've never made that mistake again.
Think how he could have made you feel, though, if he wasn't like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of my mentors, quite a significant entrepreneur, his team had made a mistake and it cost them millions, right? And he said in the meeting, he says, right, okay, we've just paid for the most expensive lesson ever and we've all learned. And they were all like, whew, and he said, but we're not doing any resets.
Yeah.
Like you've learned it once, you're not going to learn the lesson twice.
Yeah.
He seems pretty enlightened, actually, and he must have been quite maybe more self-aware of had his own experiences. I'm not trying to read his mind, but to be able to treat you with such empathy. I mean, because it would have been easy to throw his weight around and humiliate you. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. It was very early on in my career. I was very young at the time and, still working on building your confidence. And that could have really been a significant setback, when you look back on it and think how things, impact you years later. That could have been one of those moments. But I wouldn't say it was a huge failing. It was a lesson for me. And it was just a real lesson in terms of how people have treated me over the years and what I've taken from that to be able to then form my own leadership style, really.
So on the subject of a mistake rather than a failure that it's obviously stayed with you? What are you I don't know, as Brits, we don't like speaking about these things so much, but
Yeah.
what are you most proud of in a career setting?
I am really proud of the Buy Social Corporate Challenge. Looking back 5 years ago in terms of where we are now and, how I've driven, and supported by Zurich, have driven that social procurement campaign. We've been recognised last year for a British Insurance Award for that campaign. And I look back and I just think the change in our culture now within our sourcing and procurement function, how we've driven and really embraced social procurement,
Hmm.
that my team all are real super advocates for the campaign and for the program and for the initiative. I'm really proud of how I've been able to support and drive that through the organization to the point where it's now a global campaign.
You've actually jumped ahead to my next question, Jeanette. I've been really looking forward to exploring the Buy Social Corporate Challenge and how pioneering you've been in that regard. I've seen from personal experience the real sense of ownership your team have with the program. Could you give us an insight into what inspired those strategic decisions?
I mean, the corporate challenge, it aligns with Zurich's purpose and values. It's a perfect fit. And since we joined the corporate challenge in 2015, we started working with some fantastic organizations like yourself, Wild Hearts, 90 from Babies with Love. And we just saw how much we can drive positive change through our buying behaviors. It is so inspiring to receive the impact reports and the MI from yourselves, and we can see how much our spend has really changed lives. I use Wild Hearts as an example when I'm talking to key stakeholders and also internally, externally, when I'm using an example of the impact our relationship, for Business for Good has had, and over the course of our contract with you, I always quote, probably spent around 1.5 million on office supplies. That's positively impacted over 6,000 lives. That kind of impact when you're talking to the organization, people sit up and they listen. For us in source and procurement anyway, that really inspired us. That drove us to kind of say, okay, what can we do as a function that we can really influence and drive our organization? So we created a vision and an ambition within sourcing and procurement. And that was that our procurement practices would drive positive social, environmental, and ethical outcomes. And we created 3 work streams, so social, environmental, and ethical, and really started to build on that strategy and the framework. And I talked about this being expanded globally. And we've done that by building the framework, minimum standards, toolkits to support my colleagues across the globe. And we look at sustainability now and social procurement at every stage of our procurement process, from due diligence to supply governance and selection and ongoing supplier management.
I was given the privilege of getting an insight into your supplier code of conduct when it was about to be released, and it's pretty progressive to say the least. Like, I even heard one of your leading team members saying when we were training your procurement teams, which we'll come on to later, that if companies didn't share your vision as to what you're trying to do from an environmental and social point of view, that you would begin to potentially fade them out as suppliers. That is, I think, when the world begins to shift, when a brand the size of Zurich starts making purchasing decisions based on the impact of the suppliers. What is it from a cultural point of view? There's a lot of brands who are increasingly aware of their social impact of their spend, but Zurich seems to have gone quite a step beyond that, I think.
Yeah, I think it's because, as I said, it really aligns to our purpose and our values. In 2019, when we launched our sustainable sourcing initiative across the globe, we communicated that to over 50,000 employees around the globe. We have a global community of practice, which we are driving the activities across the country. We're sharing best practice and the success stories. But you mentioned it. I think what I've seen, and certainly from leading the UK team, is a real passion from our employees to be able to drive some positive change, and the real sense of people doing something, within this role. So the campaign has grown extensively, around our organization. We've had some real senior leadership sponsorship. And as you said, we're implementing the supplier code of conduct. That's been sort of some time in the making, if you like, to get us to this point to be able to implement that. But again, when you talk around, what I'm proud of the initiative, launching that supplier code of conduct.
There's one thing that I found really personally really inspiring was when you got in touch to say that you were interested in using Microtyco Innovate to train your procurement teams. Now, for context, Microtyco Innovate is embedded in the graduate and apprenticeship, senior leadership programs of some of the biggest companies in the world. But Zurich were the first company to say specifically you wanted to develop entrepreneurial, innovative thinking in procurement teams. The reason I want to discuss this with you is because if you listen to our podcast, you've got Linda Candy at Johnson & Johnson or Robin Syndrome at Nestle, independently of each other, talking about how much the role of procurement has changed and the opportunity that provides for procurement leaders. That if we're moving into a world where people are using their spend to create social environmental impact, the role of the procurement team has enhanced and expanded significantly. What do you think are the skill sets that the procurement leaders of the future will need? How do you think the role's evolving in that context?
Yes, so for me, the skill sets that are necessary to build the future of our procurement people is really around thought leadership. When I look back 4 or 5 years, we've really come on a journey, especially within Zurich, where we've insourced the function. Again, we've built an in house team and we've built credibility and specialisms within the category management. But this training really helps to raise awareness within our function of societal issues and role in business and what we can do in terms of driving positive outcomes, which aligns back to our three work streams and our ambition and our vision as a procurement function. It really develops stakeholder management and influencing skills, but also that thought leadership again. The entrepreneurial thinking and the techniques it gives is just fantastic because we can help build proposition management. We're so close to the market, to our suppliers, to our customers. We can really start to drive innovation within the organization. And I think the training really helps build those skill sets for the procurement professional going forward to be able to manage that and support it. Practicing the positive pessimism, encourages procurement people to think about what could go wrong and implement the fixes, before they occur. And, that's essential in our roles. We work with the business to onboard new products and services. So having the skills to work through those potential issues before they arise, ensures projects are successful for the future. So for me, it's fantastic and it absolutely fits to support the future of a source and procurement function.
It's amazing, Janine. I have listened to so many of your peers, and you can hear their voices just light up when they talk about how much their role has expanded. Where you spend your money is how you reveal your true values. Anybody can do a PR campaign on, their sustainability policy, but it comes down to your purchasing decisions is where it's literally putting your money where your mouth is, isn't it? The opportunity for procurement people and the way they're grasping it is very, very inspiring because it's only going to be positive outcomes that will come from it. On that note, Jeanette, you've pioneered social procurement within a global brand, and you've touched on many points at how you've brought that to life. What advice would you give to your peers who are listening today that are looking to deliver similar strategies within their own companies?
Yeah, so I would say, firstly, make a business case, and identify the key stakeholders and budget holders. So it's around winning the hearts and minds. Why should they do this? Why is it a business benefit? I often say to our stakeholders when I'm talking about social enterprises that they're not a charity. It's the same quality and price. It's just got an added social benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll remember this. We did a social procurement launch in Zurich about 18 months, 2 years ago now, where we invited, along with yourself, some of our partners, some of our social enterprises that we partner with in the UK. And we invited you to come along to talk about your social mission. So it wasn't a sales pitch. It wasn't to push your sales or, in terms of the organization, but it was to really talk around the social impact and how organizations like Zurich partnering with you really benefits society.
Mm-hmm.
And that launch was so successful. We had so many key stakeholders messaging us and getting in touch via that launch. And I think it was a real turning point. So I'd recommend a campaign which really gets that message across in terms of what the social benefit is, but also that the products and the quality and the price, it's commercially viable. Another step would be to really embed social procurement across your S2P processes. So, from your RFP to your supplier due diligence onboarding process, your supplier relationship management programs, the code of conduct, which we've talked about, really embed that for the selection of suppliers and also train and engage your staff. We've done a lot the last few years, as you know. Certainly, we've introduced in Micro Tyco Innovate into our source and procurement function. But even prior to that, we had SEUK come in and talk to my UK team around, social enterprises, the benefits, the organizations, how we can get involved, etc. We talk around creating the strategy. So, where are the opportunities and prioritize? We have category plans here, and we've really embedded social procurement into those category plans. Where's the opportunity? There's no point focusing on areas where there aren't any solutions or suppliers don't exist.
Mhm.
So, you've really got to identify the categories and those opportunities and then really drive it in those areas and be realistic. Don't try to boil the ocean. Implementation takes time and it takes patience. And that's where I talk about that perseverance and resilience. And then finally, I think it's around, well, the two last points really. How can you influence your tier ones? So how can you bring your suppliers on the journey and kind of use those relationships as well? So if we look at our facilities management, and some of the opportunities that we have to partner with as social enterprises, it's around working with those tier ones so that they then onboard those suppliers, so those products and services are in your organization. And then lastly, it's around sharing the story and the impact. And I think I've mentioned it before, but I often use Wild Hearts as a great example mix. So I talk around, the impact that our spend has had with you over the course of our contract for office supplies. Through that initial contract, we've positively impacted over 6,000 lives. That is so powerful and so motivational when you share those stories.
Isn't it interesting? You talk about harnessing your social capital, socializing the idea, and providing the proof points within the business. And as you say, it doesn't happen overnight. It's just building up the evidence portfolio, if you will, of the business benefits. That's great advice, though, Jeanette. Let's come back to you. I don't mean to make you blush, Jeanette, but as you are always getting teased fondly by your team for all our calls, you were, amongst your many awards, you were recently recognised in Insurance Business UK's Elite Women list for 2021, specifically for your role in developing a social supply chain at Zurich. What's next? What would you like to see happen in the next few years?
I'd like to drive the social procurement work stream globally. So we've talked around what our aspirations are and what we're doing in terms of the launch of the supplier code of conduct, the toolkit, the framework. But I'm currently at the moment working with SEUK and a small group of the members on a global expansion pilot. But the strategy for Zurich, is how can we take the success that we've had in the UK and leverage that success globally? How can we start to drive those partnerships that we have here in the UK with global organizations as well? And I think one of the challenges there is trying to identify those opportunities,
Mhm.
looking at it from category specifics. Where's the opportunities for us to start to grow those relationships and identify networks globally like we have here in the UK with SEUK?
Mhm. Britain's really pretty advanced when it comes to social
Yeah,
procurement.
yeah,
We're always quite hard on ourselves, but when you look at some of the other territories that we've, even the tax regime is not friendly, for want of a better word, towards reinvesting your
yeah.
profits in social impact. So it's quite interesting. I think you'll be able to be a real source of information again for your peers on what it's like trying to pioneer social procurement in different cultures and business environments. And also, we've touched on a point, and sometimes it's tricky to find social businesses that can operate globally and at scale as well.
And it's also having that infrastructure. As you say, it's very mature here in the UK. There's lots of networks, but how can we build and grow that? Also, how can we look at using our tools that we've got in place? So we've got a global procure to pay system.
Mhm.
How can we look to use those systems then to build a social platform? that's a global platform, because at the moment it's very country by country and it's a very manual process. So we're trying to identify 2 countries and starting with EMEA really, where we can start to build a directory like we have in the UK, but also to build that infrastructure. It's all good and well me talking to my peers globally, but if there isn't the opportunities or the organizations there that are relevant to the services we're buying as well, it's extremely difficult to get that traction.
Absolutely so. You can have one of your peers in South America, etc., getting very inspired by what you've done, and then they find trying to implement it in their own environment. By way of example, just using that territory off the top of my head, it's
Yeah.
not as straightforward. And I think the fact that there's such a commitment and drive from the top, and there are such good role models of best practice, will certainly make the process a lot easier than some culture where there's a lone voice trying to implement something and they're not getting the ear of the board to implement it. Coming back to you then, and as we come to the end of the interview, there's been so many touch points, and maybe as an observer from the outside looking in, that maybe points of your own personality or your upbringing or what you've done that you might take for granted. But talking about work ethic, resilience, tenacity, entrepreneurial thinking, humility, you do exemplify a lot of those traits, Janette. What advice would you give to someone with ambitions to build a successful career in this new world of procurement? What, if you were starting over, what do you wish you'd known?
That's a very good question, Mick. How long have you got?
Take your
So
time, take your time.
I think it's work for an organisations with values that align to your own. So it's no mistake that I've been with Zurich for 17 years. That's a decision I've made. They've supported me in growing my career. They've supported me through life's challenges as well, and,
Hmm.
and, and family commitments. As well, it's expand and lean on your network. It's really important, to build those networks internally within your organization and externally. Everything is built on relationships, especially within our profession. Look for an organization that aligns with your own. Get a sponsor, internally. Get somebody that you really, really admire as a leader, or they've got traits that you look and aspire to have.
Hmm.
That's certainly something I've done throughout my career. And that sponsor, who, I won't name, but I will share this podcast with him later, has been there throughout my career and has really, really supported my development. And it's watching how they lead, and the traits they display that you can learn from.
Absolutely.
So I think that's so important. And then I would say, just go for it. Be a bit different, be outspoken. And I think one of the main traits is perseverance and be resilient. So we've talked around where we started with the Buy Social campaign 5 years ago. It didn't happen overnight. We've seen absolute traction and buy-in and alignment from key stakeholders over the last 2 years. But it doesn't happen overnight. It takes perseverance.
That's fantastic advice. The power of role models. You can't hit a target you don't know exists. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
isn't it
Yeah.
incredible? I remember I was very fortunate to work with some very successful entrepreneurs when I was younger, and they didn't realize it, but I was watching their every move and all the little things I learned, how they dealt with conflict and stress, and all these little subtle, as you say, watching how somebody leads. Just
Yeah.
thinking of that though, Jeanette, because I'm really taking your advice because it's so practical. If someone is listening to you, how can you tell if an organization shares your values before you've joined them? And how is there anything you can do to stack the deck in your favor where you can get yourself a really good sponsor rather than hoping that you'll join and one will turn up?
And when I look back, when I joined Zurich, I didn't really know. If I'm honest, early on in my career, I was just taking those chances and,
Hmm.
and moving to progress. And pretty soon after starting with Zurich, within a couple of years, the organization has also developed as organizations do, and they change. And I just, the purpose of the organization, the values absolutely align with mine. And the culture of the organization, I mean, you've worked with us, and it's some of the feedback, you say as well, you've
Hmm.
noticed around the culture. It's very empowering, it's supportive as well. So, I think now if I was to go back, I think I would do a lot more research, and understand a lot more about the values and the purpose of that organization, and to really ask yourself what are their values? Do they align to yours? Will it give you the freedom to be the person you need to be able to grow within your career?
Hmm.
And to your second point, Mick, I think be bold. You made the point around I do a lot of watching. I love to watch people watch. So, I love going on holiday and sitting at the airport and getting there an hour early just so I can watch people coming and going. But, observe, watch people, then be bold to approach those people that you kind of look at and think, I've got aspirations to lead like you do. That for me, when I picked my first sponsor and mentor within the organization, I was bold enough to ask. The worst thing they can say is no, I won't, and I haven't got the time. But, I was fortunate that they didn't, and as I say now, 17 years later, I still very much respect and admire that individual and also all the coaching and mentoring advice they've given me over the years. But again, I've also taken on, had other coaching experiences and opportunities through different programs within Zurich. So again, when I talk about the organization, we're very fortunate that Zurich do have a number of programs that support aligning mentors and mentees, etc.
I like it, the fact that you didn't wait for your sponsor to come and adopt you. You went up and picked them.
Yeah. I asked to be adopted.
Do you know what, Janette, as I've said to you so many times, I was really looking forward to this podcast because of all the conversations we have, in a day-to-day basis. You've shared so much wisdom, humility, but real practical advice as well, both on how to bring social procurement to life in a large global brand, but also an ambitious person wanting to progress in their career, some really key takeaways for them to put into action. So I'm really, really grateful to you. Thank you so much for everything you've done for Wild Hearts. You and the team are very, very dear to us. And it's an absolute privilege being able to work with you.
Thank you, Mick.